What's going on, guys? Jovan here with the Real Bass Pursuit, and on this week's Tackle Tip Tuesday, I'm going to be breaking down something that's technical and doesn't get talked about enough. That's slackline control. We spend a lot of time thinking about the bait, the rod, the reel, but the real connection between you and the fish is that line. And how you manage that line is going to determine how natural that bait actually looks. Now, slack line is simply that loose line between your rod tip and your bait. But there's a big difference between random slack and controlled slack. If that line stays tight the entire time, you're going to be pulling that bait towards you and chasing that fall. If you dump your rod and you let that bow naturally form, you're going to be disconnected and late to absolutely everything. Think about those bottom contact baits, those jigs, those Texas rigs, and those weighted plastics. When that bait hits the water, the most natural thing that it can do is fall. Gravity is already going to give it action, so you don't need to force it. So instead of reeling tight immediately, you're going to want to follow that bait down with your rod tip. You're not pulling that line and you're not dropping the rod. You're simply going to be tracking that fall, and you're going to stay connected without interfering. You're going to want to watch your line as it falls. If it jumps, if it shifts sideways, or it stops before it hits the bottom, that's information. You're not guessing. You're reading that line. Now let's add some wind to that equation. When you've got wind in your equation, that's gonna create something that's called artificial slack. That line is gonna bow dramatically and your feedback is gonna become muted, even though it looks like you're still connected. So what you gotta do is you gotta start making some adjustments. Try lowering your rod tip, changing your casting angles, and sometimes going slightly heavier so you can maintain that bottom contact. At this point here, you're not gonna be fighting the wind. You're gonna be adapting to your connection. When you start paying attention to that space between your rod tip and that lure, your whole presentation becomes more intentional. And that right there is where the real difference is made. Once again, my name is Jovan with the Real Bass Pursuit, and this here was your Tackle Tip Tuesday.